Welcome to Strength in the Numbers. My name is Andrew Codd, accountant, author, and commercial finance entrepreneur, and it's my job each week to bring you leaders in finance and business and deconstruct with them their real stories, insights, and hard-won lessons into practical advice on the key strengths and qualities you need to remain relevant in accounting and finance today, as well as the steps you can begin to take to elevate the impact you make to have a fun, successful, and rewarding career in accounting and finance. Now let's go over to the show.
If you're a business CFO and you go deep dive into the business nuances, these are a few examples where you can really contribute managing the two objectives of growth and the risk.
Hi everyone, welcome to this week's Strength in the Numbers. Now some of you may recognize the voice of this week's guest mentor, Anand Soni. And Anand is a renowned speaker and strategic writer on finance and on business. And that comes from having a 30 plus year career as a senior finance leader, commercial CFO, managing many diversified businesses covering manufacturing, contracting, construction, property development, retail, you name it, FMCG, the list goes on. And all of this helps make for a very practical and very insightful episode of Strength in the Numbers this week. So Anand and myself, we go and cover a number of different areas together. And what I particularly like is how he shares his experiences and thoughts on how to gain confidence, particularly in these times of managing business through a lot of complexity. And really, one way of doing this is looking at ourselves and competing with ourselves every day. So we go into that, and also the importance of self-belief and how we make sure that no one else takes that away from us. Because that, like a lot of things, is a choice. So Anand shares with us his journey on that as well. We also go into the topic of this podcast, which is the role of the business CFO, and how that compares and differs from a regular CFO role, plus the responsibilities that come with this role that has been seen evolved in accounting and finance. So definitely for those of you curious to understand what the business CFO is, it's definitely worth your while staying tuned into this episode and also connecting with Anand afterwards as well. So remember, if you do enjoy this episode, you can find out more details about Anand, the key quotes, resources, timestamp show notes, and a lot more at SITNshow.com. And we really appreciate when you share the episode with your colleagues. We're available on all the major platforms: iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube, Spotify, and soon to be Amazon Music. And as always, really appreciate you investing your time in Strength in the Numbers. So that's enough for me, and without further ado, over to Anand and the show. So Anand, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and thank you for inviting me at this great platform. Thank you so much.
Hey, look, it's our pleasure. It's our pleasure. And look, again, sorry for so long. It took us to reach out and get you on. I'm delighted to share you with our audience. And for some of our audience who maybe aren't familiar with your journey in accounting and finance, would you mind maybe going through a brief story about how you ended up in finance and doing what you're doing?
That's very interesting. I loved finance, so I qualified as a chartered accountant, and then I did my CPA from US, did all my exams in the first knock. So at 22, I was a chartered accountant. Then I worked for the first 7 years back in India. And then 98, I came down to Middle East, spent about 7 years in Muscat. And then here I'm in Dubai since 2005. So how many years now? 15 years in Dubai, about 7 years in Muscat. So Andrew, essentially, if you look at, I'm more a Middle East guy, having significantly spent time here. But overall, about 28 years of experience. And the journey has been it's a pretty up and down in the sense that about every professional goes through it. So I'm not an exception. But yes, I would say I was lucky that I could work for different diversified businesses, whether it was manufacturing, contracting, construction, trading, retail, hospitality, stock markets, health sector. So give me a business, Andrew, I will handle it. That's where I'm coming from. The other highlight of my journey has been that I have worked essentially for the family-driven organizations, So when I say family, it means a father, son, two daughters, father, son, mother, okay? So with some external directors too, but essentially a family-driven organization. This is what my core expertise is. And in Dubai in 2008, I'd seen the good times too. Then when the crisis happened in 2008 and plus, I went through the organization. So actually, when I look back, I have seen organizations from different phases of business. For example, some of the organization may be in survival, then consolidation, then going to growth, and then going to acceleration. So I have been through all these phases. So, when I said, give me the business, Andrew, I will handle, I think it's also give me the phase, I will manage. Whether it's a survival phase or a consolidation phase, that's what my journey is. That's about the professional part. The other professional part, which I think I'm pretty proud of, and I keep doing it, I'm a fairly well-known speaker at the various conferences. I keep sharing my views as a panel speaker, as a solo speaker, as and when someone invites me. And I really speak from my head and heart, as I'm doing now. So whatever I'm going to say, it's something which I experienced. You probably won't find all these things in a textbook. It's what I believe, what I felt. Someone may agree,
Yes,
someone
yes.
may not agree. I'm fine with that. I also am a strategic writer too. I keep on writing articles, and I'm pretty frequent blogger too. I keep writing on the professional matters, sometimes on the finance, business, and at times on the leadership matters too. This is how, and a lot of people ask me, Andrew, that what sort of satisfaction you get when you go into conference as a speaker, because
Hmm.
public speaking is supposedly the most fearful thing, as people say.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
difficult to
Apparently,
go on the
death came
podium and
third.
speak. Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, people were
Right,
rating
right.
this and they put it up. Yeah, death came third. Yeah.
And my answer to all of them is, look, I don't go for conferences or as a speaker just to speak. I really consider it as a significant outlet to de-stress myself. Because you see, as a professionals, you need different outlets to de-stress. Someone may be finding reading books. Someone may find gardening.
Hmm.
I find de-stressing when I talk as a speaker or when I write strategy. So this is how I relate to why I go for all this. Here, I'm there to discuss with you about business CFO and yeah, interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one concept I want to get into. But given your journey, I've got a couple of questions from your journey. Actually, the first one is those four phases you mentioned. Anand, give me the I'm Anand, give me the phases. I'll manage it. I'll deal with it. Where do you get that strength or that self belief from? Is that from just your personality, or is there something deeper in your training that you leverage in that terms of that self belief?
Obviously, you learn every day, right? It would be pretty incorrect for me to say that, look, I picked up from the word go. No, obviously, the first few years you learn, you make mistakes. But if you really ask me the driving force, the confidence, I think a couple of things here. I mentioned you that I was lucky, or whichever way you say it, have gone through pre 2008 times, 2008, then post 2008, and having seen the diversified businesses. So that was on the work front, right?
Hmm.
I also believe that at the end of the day, your work has a lot to do with how do you take every day. I mean, the sense that I believe that I compete with myself every day, every
Mm-hmm.
minute, which means, am I doing better than what I did yesterday? And if I have made some mistakes, it's as simple as accept, own, learn, move, do something different.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
exactly is the definition of when you say I'm competing with myself. And I'm a strong believer of that. That's where your best comes all the time. The other is the self belief, because your self belief, I believe, Andrea, is something which is with you. I don't think that anyone can take your self belief unless you allow it to be taken by others. And it is not a textbook doctrine, it is not a textbook idiom. It is very practical because your self belief is something. And if you allow it to be taken by others, then that's your problem, not theirs.
Yes.
The two driving forces, apart from the diversified businesses, good or bad times, is competing with self and the fact that your self belief cannot be taken by others unless you're allowed. These are my driving forces, which gives the confidence.
I love that second one. I don't think we talk about that enough. And self belief. And it was another guest mentor on the show we had, and that is something in terms of competing with yourself. If we're just competing for that 1% better every day, and you compound that across a year, that's nearly 3,700% better by the end of the year. That's powerful impact of
Absolutely.
compounding.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
so we should never lose sight of that and never give up that self belief to someone else, because that's what we're missing out on. So that's really great advice. And the only other question I had then, I suppose, on that journey that I'd love to pick your mind on was, look, you know, a lot of our audience is in Europe and the US and UK, but we've got like a lot of our listeners out of the Middle East. Actually, you know, it's fantastic to see and hear the feedback. I suppose in terms of yourself, how have you seen the Middle East develop over the last 15 or so years, and how do you see that continuing into the future from your perspective, your broadened perspective? Do you see like a good outlook for the Middle East, or are there some choppy roads ahead?
Well, things have been changing in the Middle East. Again, when you talk about Middle East, UAE is different. You have so many countries in Middle East, but I distinguish UAE. UAE is the best in the Middle East, and there cannot be any two
we hear
opinions
them
on that.
later.
As I said, I always feel myself lucky and blessed to be in this great country and this great city. So it's a very forward-looking, very vibrant thinking, very positive leadership. We always try to do better than what was yesterday. I mean, I can confidently talk about the UAE. We have been doing good. We are doing good, and we will continue to do all the great things. I have strong faith in the country, in the economy, and the most important part is the ability of the country to face any challenges, whether it's
Yeah, yeah.
economic challenges or health challenges. I think that's where. So I don't want to comment on the Middle East, but I can definitely confidently talk about the country which I love so much, the UAE.
I appreciate you're very passionate about it. And look, you know, I only was ever out there for a week with work, so I never spent as much obviously much time. But that's great to hear that, you know, you feel that the future's good and strong, and great ability to face those challenges within the UAE. I
True.
suppose then you mentioned also, you know, you frequently write, and you're a thought leader, and this concept of the business CFO, which I know you've written about extensively and commented on. For some of our audience may not be familiar with how you describe that. Would you mind maybe sharing your thoughts on what a business CFO is for them?
Business CFO is a term which I coined. Current times and COVID times, and even earlier also. If you ask me, there are two broad responsibilities of a CFO. What are those two? First is, as I mentioned earlier, whatever the phase of your business is, whether you're into survival, consolidation, growth, acceleration. As a CFO or as a business CFO, you're expected to take the business from, if it is in survival, take to the next stage, then
Mm-hmm.
take to the next stage. And that's one big bullet point for the CFO. That's not only thing. The other part is the risk mitigation, assessment and management of risk and any circumstances. So the board or the chairman expects a CFO to manage his businesses and then mitigate it against risk. Now, Andrew, if you logically look, what I'm saying is you have two different diagonally opposite things which a CFO is expected to deliver: growth, managing risk. Now, if you really logically look at, if you have to manage the risk and take the business to the next level, then you have to be a business CFO. So what is this business CFO? Obviously, business CFO is someone who goes into the nuances of the businesses, understands the business well, and relate every business to these aspects, two preambles, the two bullet points which I said. Now, let me give you one or two examples just to drive what is this business here. For example, let us say if you're handling a trading company, a trading business. Now, you can have trading as B2B, which is business to business, and you can have B2C, which is business to customer and customer. A typical B2B could be, say, an interior fit out like furnitures, where your end user is also a business house like yours. Now, for that, you need showrooms. But if you have a business which is B2C, typically, there's food items or medicines where the end user is like Andrew is an end user
Yeah,
or Anand
yeah,
is an end user,
yeah,
B2C,
yeah, yeah.
customer. So what do you do then? In that situation, you need distribution channels. Retail showroom won't help you. Now, unless you understand this, and if you're a CFO who cannot appreciate this difference, you won't be in the position to take the business with the right suggestions, right solutions. Let me give you another example. You see, in a manufacturing business, now let's talk about a manufacturing business. Typically in a manufacturing business, we as finance experts always believe that nothing can be done at the cost of goods sold level. It is beyond. We can't reduce it. And that's a fact, Andrea. I mean, we are very comfortable
Yeah.
in bringing down selling and distribution or,
Yes. No,
employment
completely.
cost. But ask
Exactly.
anyone cost of goods sold. And, typically what is our easy
Uh,
excuse? Look, it's very technical. especially for a manufacturing business.
Yeah.
I'm not a production guy. What can I
Yeah.
do?
Yeah. Yeah.
Here is
Yeah.
the difference. If you're a business CFO, like in one of my organizations, what I did was I went to the shop floor, understood the product mix of the manufacturing process, and then we could suggest something which could bring down the cost. Right? There's another example of how a business CFO can help. Let me give you the one more example, which is typically could be for the pricing. Pricing is so important in current times when the revenue is under stress. Now, most of the CFOs will tell you, how can I increase the revenue? How can I can't, my pricing is, I can't lower down the pricing. But again, if you are a business CFO who understands the business, and he would then suggest, why don't you go for something known as a minimum variable pricing model by which you can recover the variable cost and manage the fixed cost. So in that, you are increasing a turnover too. So the point I'm driving is, I can keep giving you so many other examples, but these examples are basically to convey that, look, if you're a business CFO and you go deep dive into the business nuances, these are few examples where you can really contribute managing the two objectives of growth and the risk. Of risk, when you look at in the current times, one of the basic risk is collections, collecting money from your debtors.
Yeah. 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 Huge risk at the moment. Yes.
All right. Now, a typical CFO will tell, look, what can I do? The liquidity is under stress, market is bad. But if you are a business CFO who understands your business and understand the business of your debtors, you will come up with so many solutions which can help you in speeding up the collections, provided you understand the business you're in. So these are a few examples which I believe the business CFO, and but the role has significantly undergone a change in the current times, Andrew. If you ask me, the role of a business CFO in the last 5 months has gone big time changes than what it was, say, in the month of March.
Okay, that's a profound statement to make. Why do you think that is, Anand?
Very interesting, very, very interesting. You see, again, the expectations from the business CFO still remain same. The two preamble, that hasn't changed. But the dynamics have changed completely in the last 4 months, 5 months. Now, what has changed? You see, the biggest change in my view is the risk perception. For example, earlier, I've been CFO for the last 10 years, even more than that, but I never heard anyone asking me, say, before February 2020, are you worried on the risks? In those days, the risk will be what is going to happen to the business after 1 year, after 1.5 years. Or should you go and invest in Ireland, Andrew's country? Or should you go and invest in UK? Diversification, all right? So the risk in those days used to be investment based, used to be a horizon of 1 year, 1.5 years. There was never a risk assessment on a going concern basis. There was never a risk assessment to say, look, are you going to survive after 1 month? I've never heard these sort of analysis anytime before February.
It's funny you say that because, like, I have to say, in my entire career, I have only done one impairment review on an asset, as in a company, and that was because I was part of a private equity firm, and they wanted to make sure that they didn't have to impair the asset, and that's like what, once in 20 years. So, like, I can imagine that's a very similar experience for a lot of CFOs out there, finance leaders, that they've never really had to look at their business as a going concern, even though it's one of the fundamental principles of of accounting and finance, right?
Absolutely, you're spot on. You're spot on. But that's where we are. So today, if you ask me, the whole responsibility of a business CFO is manage today, manage 3 months, 6 months. That's it. And
Yeah.
actually speaking, if you can ensure a break-even business in current times, it's an achievement for a business
I
CFO.
know, yeah.
This is a significant difference when you ask
I know,
me
isn't it?
how the role has changed. This is a
Yeah.
significant difference in the current times.
Yeah, but we should all know our break even and margins of safety. I think that's just I mean, maybe it's just forcing us to not necessarily up our game, but use a suite of tools that we've been trained to use. These are not new terms for us. It's just maybe we're a bit rusty at implementing them. And I do have another question actually, Anand, which is how then does the business CFO differ from a normal CFO? Is there such a thing anymore?
The few things which I mentioned to you, the two main points which a business CFO is supposed to do it, I'm not sure a normal CFO will be really accountable for it. Probably a normal CFO may not go deep dive into the businesses. The other point which I have been differentiates a business CFO and a normal CFO is how do you deal with the stakeholders? It's a very important point. Because you see what happens is, Andrew, we can keep talking for maybe another 2 hours till the time cows come home. Right. Till the time cows come home, we can keep debating. I can give you 100 examples. If you are a board member and if you are the chairman, you will definitely ask me, Anand, where are my solutions? So one of the key difference between a business CFO and another CFO is dealing with the ownership, because that's very, very tricky actually. And again, if you ask me, the dealing with the ownership, say 6 months back before COVID came, and today, there's a big time changes. There's a big time changes as a business CFO when you're dealing and managing the ownership.
What one particular?
For example, nowadays, if you have to deal with the ownership, first of all, you have to be a good listener. That's the starting point. You've got to be a listener. Most of the time we start believing that, and I can talk about the family businesses because that's what my core expertise has been. Many times we undermine saying, look, we as professionals know everything. Now I disagree. As someone who has built a business, you got to listen to them. When I say listen, I don't mean to say that you need to accept what they're saying, but you listen to them. And if you have to change yourself. There's no room for ego space. So if you go with a suggestion, after listening to the ownership, you believe you need to change it. That's one. Two, well, you've listened, but you still believe that as business CFO, what you're suggesting is making a lot of sense. Hold your views, don't give up. Again, go back to your ownership with your facts, figures, logic,
has to be data driven.
Analysis. And here's the key. Explain them in the language in which they understand. Again, repeat, explain them in the language in which they understand.
Which you only get from listening.
Yes. So if you can't explain them, the fault lies with you. Explain them in the language which they understand, make that effort. And that's where many of the CFOs fail. Make that effort. Now, the other point is when you deal with these stakeholders, the external stakeholders and the internal stakeholders, I've seen if you really demonstrate to the ownership that you have made very sincere efforts in getting a job done, they do appreciate it.
Yeah.
Now, and I'll give you an example. Let us say you have to manage a bank, very relevant in current times. Most of the companies are restructuring their bank liabilities currently, right? So you go to your banks. So you have banks as one external stakeholder, and then you have the ownership as the another stakeholder, and you are the business here. So how do you manage it? Your objective is to get the restructuring from the bank. I'm talking of the COVID times. Now, you talk to the banks, give your business logic, negotiate with them. You may succeed, you may fail, you may partially succeed. Now, if you have handled your banker as an external stakeholder well, and then you go back to your internal stakeholders at the board and say, look, I have made X, Y, Z efforts with this particular bank. Here is my efforts. And show the genuine positive intent that you tried your best. And I'm really convinced that if you follow this route, then there's every chance that the ownership will listen to you because they know that you made efforts. The point is either we, as the CFOs, business CFOs, we don't make the efforts or we don't have the self-belief that we can convince the stakeholders. And that's where I come starting point. Our self-belief is very important. No one can take it unless you allow it to be taken. So managing stakeholders is something which is another area which differentiates between a business CFO and a normal CFO, more so in the current times.
I think that's where the business comes in. It's really an appreciation of the stakeholders of the business meshing with the CFO and the fundamental equation,
That's
which
right.
is that value equation, isn't it? Which is it's growing cash flows relative to risk. It's that double side of the equation, and sometimes they're diametrically opposed. So that's really great. And I suppose with some of our listeners who are thinking about, that sounds like something I want to do, be a business CFO. Do you have any sort of maybe practical advice or maybe some steps they can begin to take to become business CFOs themselves?
That's very important, and that's something which I'm asked every time. Well, there are 4 or 5 steps for anyone who wants to become a business CFO. First, of course, get into the business nuances, understand the business. That's one. 2, you should also know when you're going to the business to understand the business, what you are expected to do. And there's a problem. So you need to know what is the solution expected. So you must know the roadmap. So you cannot find a solution if you don't know the roadmap. The other word is the process. So you also need to equally know a process. And let me give you an example. A payable accountant can keep telling you, look, I don't have money, I haven't paid the supplier. But if the payable accountant knows the shipping process, how the goods come from Thames Port in UK to our Jabalali port in Dubai, if he knows the process, he would know this is the shipping time, and he can make a very judgmental call on which supplier to pay. Now, is the accountant willing to understand the process? So knowing the process is a very, very critical for you to become a business here.
And that's what we call the end-to-end process, right? It's not just something that's an end, transaction. It's the end-to-end business process. It's knowing, as you said, where it could originate in a report in Thames in the UK, in London, and the process then ends up in Dubai, and then it ends up in a financial transaction that may or may not take place at a certain time. That's end-to-end. It's business and financial.
Yeah, so you need to know end-to-end process. That's the point number 2. The other thing is, once you know the process, once you're going deep dive in the business, and you know what solution is expected, that's the third. The fourth is how to get a solution. There's no point of knowing this is what I need to know. What are you supposed to do to get a solution? What are you supposed to do to get a solution? And one more point is there is, you see, people always get confused when I say getting deep dive into the businesses. They believe that, look, they should spend all the time in understanding the business. No, this is not what I am suggesting. There's always a cost benefit analysis for a finance professional to get into the businesses. So let's say a manufacturing business, no one is expecting you to go and understand each and every manufacturing production process. So you need to draw a line. You need to draw a line to what extent you should go deep dive. Because you are managing the financial and commercial aspect. In your over-enthusiasm, don't overindulge. This is one of the other aspects, other extreme, people going too much deep dive and then saying there's no time for them. Because let's understand one thing, a business CFO is still supposed to be technically very strong, academically, accounting-wise, fundamentally very strong. If you are not that, you can't become a business CFO.
How do you stop yourself going too deep? That's the thing. That's a common challenge for a lot of us, right? Is how do you know when enough is enough detail?
Well, I'll give you an example just to answer you. I think that's the best way. Let us say, if it's a construction business model, I think I've spoken about manufacturing, I've spoken about retail. So I'm now going to talk about construction business. Let us say in a construction business, if you are a developer who's building the buildings, big time buildings, in which sense, in that time, probably I would expect a business CFO to go to the project sites to see what is happening on the projects, because that will help him in understanding which supplier to pay, which supplier not to pay.
Context.
Right?
Yeah.
And that will also help him in understanding, because there's an accounting work in progress which you account in a balance sheet. Now, if you know after having visited a project site that this is the pending payments I have to make, this is my work in progress in my current assets in my balance sheet. So you are able to link your technical expertise of accounting, relate to the business, and then make a judgmental call. So here you need to go deep dive. But supposing if you are having a business which is of trading and which has standard products, say 8,000 items, there's no point of you to go and understand each and every nuances of 8,000 products. It's a waste of time.
Yeah.
So Andrew, I think if you appreciate the difference, and probably that will have your answer, to what extent you should go in, to what extent you should go in.
It's like a Pareto prioritization, isn't it? It's like biggest bang for your buck. Not all products are created equally. 80% of our sales come from 20% of our products, that type of thing.
So it all depends on which business you are into.
Yeah, exactly.
And your technical expertise, fundamentally strong, and then you take a decision. Otherwise, you will make a complete mess of everything.
And there's some very useful steps. Any other steps you would add to those you've just mentioned?
When the last step, and that's more to do with the personality of your person. Well, enjoy what you're doing. If you enjoy what you're doing, if you make a mistake, accept it, learn it, move it, again enjoy. So you need to enjoy it. I mean, you can't work if you don't enjoy it. Enjoy it from your head and enjoy it from your heart. Both sides. Then only you can do the best. Most of us don't enjoy it. And that's why we make mistakes.
I completely agree. And actually, it's not. Sometimes it's okay to make mistakes, and if you enjoy it, you learn from it, and then you'll make less and less or whatever. But yeah, I think that's a key point. And I suppose that's great advice for our audience listening. But I suppose for yourself, I mean, what's been the best bit of advice you've ever received?
I think the first advice which I received, and I still believe, was the same thing which I started my discussion from one of my seniors, was compete with yourself, self-compete. I'm a strong supporter of that, as I said initially. So that's the best advice which I got pretty early in my career, that don't be over enthusiastic to prove others. prove yourself, compete with yourself. You make a mistake, learn it, move. Can you be better than yesterday? So this is the advice which I got, and which I strongly believe, and which I keep sharing everywhere, because I think that's the best way.
I like that. I think it's very powerful, Anand. And I suppose, in terms of, of our audience, would you have any other parting thoughts maybe to share with them before we wrap up?
It has been a great talking to you, Andrew. And I think, of course, but for the technical glitches we had, otherwise it was a great session, and and it's very interactive session, which I like, because many times, from both the parties, from your end and the other end, if it's monologue and one person speaking, doesn't help. So I think it's a pretty interactive session. And I think I like it, honestly.
So there you have it. Hope you enjoyed today's show. If you'd like to know more about our guests today, their bio, and follow up on the resources mentioned during the show, you can find all the relevant links and more at sitnshow.com. There you'll also be able to get access to earlier shows, read the latest blogs. There's also an opportunity to subscribe to our newsletter, which will give you heads up as to when the next show is coming out, latest events, news, and anything that's going to be relevant to help you have a fun, rewarding, and successful career in finance and accounting. And just before you go, we really appreciate your feedback. If there's something we can do better on the show, something that's not working, or something you'd like to see, even a guest you'd like for us to invite onto the show, someone who you think might be able to benefit you more and also the rest of our community, please let me know. You can email me. I'm at andrew@sitnshow.com, or feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Just drop me a message so I know how you found me and we can connect. And really, it's our community that'll make the show. If we keep engaging and driving each other on, we'll keep on building our strength in the numbers. When all is said and done, if we can do the numbers better and finance better, we'll create more opportunities for ourselves, our friends, our families, our communities, and our businesses. So until next time, have a good rest of the week, take care, and let's keep building our strength in the numbers.